Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum, and welcome to another edition of Debunked here on INX Prime. My name is Sulaimaan Ravat. Shoo, the last couple of weeks have been hectic, interesting, captivating, and has made the nation somewhat nervous, anxious. There's a kind of collective sigh of relief, I think, whether you agree with the way things have concluded or not. At least it has concluded. And by the grace of the Almighty, we have not had any violence or any bloodshed. And it's not common for a liberation movement in Africa, especially when they lose their majority power, to accept it with the degree of grace that we've seen from the ANC. So, apart from the Gauteng provincial cabinet, everything else has been kind of sorted out in terms of coalition politics. We'll get into the issues, whether it's genuinely a GNU or it's not. What are the dynamics? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? What are the prospects of sustainability? What does it mean, all of this, for the nation? Just today I was reading that the happiness index suggests that South Africans post the elections are using more positive language online. Why exactly that is, they don't pick up on that, but they just pick up on the fact that South Africans seemingly online are much more positive. So we're going to be unpacking the national cabinet, looking at some of the provincial dynamics, and in the second half of the discussion, perhaps looking a little bit more at some of the long-term issues. Let me tell you who the guests are for today's program. We have former DA MP, Ghaleb Cachalia. We've got Khulekani Mathe from Busa, CEO of Business Unity South Africa, and political analyst Sandile Swana. Ghaleb, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much, Sulaiman.
Thanks, Khulekani, and Sandile, good day to you as well, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sulaiman. Thank you.
Ghaleb, let me start with you on a slightly personal note before we get into the issues. Since you've left the DA, what have you been doing? Are you now retired from active politics?
You can't retire from politics when it's in your blood. I am writing regularly for Business Day and commenting from the sidelines. And I'm also trying to build a business again for myself in this country, which is focused on attracting inward investment into our country.
Now that the dust has settled and the DA has got a number of seats in cabinet, are you more comfortable with the decision you took prior to the election to leave the party, or is there some degree of regret?
No, there's no regret. I'm very pleased that I made my position 100% clear. I declared well in advance of all of this my unease with the DA across a host of issues. And the issue of Gaza was the straw, if you like, that broke the camel's back. I have no regrets. I have a wish and a hope that our country will come together. How it will come together, and if it will come together to deliver, is a different story. And that's what we'll discuss today, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, Sandile, right, just on a broad note, I mean, I know that it's been emphasized many times, especially on social media, that other countries have taken months before they come to a deal when it comes to coalition politics. But I suppose in South Africa, the dynamics made it a little bit more urgent for this deal to be reached sooner rather than later. What are your thoughts on how things unfolded? If we go right back to a day or two after the elections, when, at the Rock, at the Results Center, it became quite clear that the ANC now lost more support than they actually expected, and even many of the polls expected, and that they had this choice, broadly speaking, either the DA or the EFF or the MK as a main coalition partner together with smaller parties. They then decided to go the route of what they call the Government of National Unity. We know what has transpired since, which led to the President's announcement on Sunday night. But what stood out for you in terms of how it played out and what were the significant dynamics, Sandile?
Thank you so much. what I will say is that, first of all, obviously, all of us as analysts, including myself, had to sort of predict where this thing is going to end up. And the 40% nationally that they achieved, that the ANC achieved, because that was the number to watch. What is the ANC going to achieve? Was predictable, and certainly some of us did call that number lower 40s. So and also the end of the monopoly of the monopoly of the ANC on power, that it is coming to an end. And it has come to an end. So the end of hegemonic politics. But then what is it that would have struck me? After these elections, what has struck me, and not all the details are totally clear, but there are two groups that prepared themselves for this outcome. The first group that prepared itself for this outcome was the business group, the big business group that actually even announced what complexion the new coalition should be. And they basically demanded that MK and EFF be excluded from the coalition, which is what has actually happened. So they were much more well prepared, and they lobbied quite properly, I think, even within the ANC. And then I think they continue to work behind the scenes to control the formation of these coalitions across nationally, KZN, and in Gauteng, to a degree in the Northern Cape. But the most important provinces right now would be Western Cape, KZN, and Gauteng. Then the next thing that happens is the fluidity and maybe even lack of preparation and clumsiness on the part of the African National Congress. Because once now I listen to the arguments by TK Nxenza in Gauteng, that they are using the coalition framework of the African National Congress. In the letter of intent that was published, I don't remember them mentioning that the coalitions that they are forming, whatever name they go under, will be using that framework. Because when you are calling people into a process, you need to stipulate in the clearest of terms what that process is going to look like and what the guiding principles of those. So that letter of intent, it caused a lot of controversy. It was ill-prepared, it was rushed, and incompetent people on the part of the ANC, more especially, were allocated to the task. Because if you want in negotiations that have got credibility, you need competent people. Their yes is yes, their no is no, and certainly there must be no misunderstanding. And that takes skill to eliminate misunderstanding very early on in the process. So this outcome was coming, it is now here, and the winners will be those who are more well prepared than others for this particular process.
So, Khulekani, from a business perspective, right, we saw this narrative develop that the coalition between the ANC and the DA or the GNU is what the markets wanted. And we saw a pushback from others saying, but why should the markets dictate? It's the voters that, should have the ultimate say, the citizens of South Africa. Would you concur with the sentiment which Sandile was alluding to, that the markets, however you would define that, were prepared, they lobbied, and this is the best outcome that they wanted? And has that then impacted positively on the markets thus far?
Thanks, Suleiman, and greetings to fellow panelists. Unlike Sandile, who clearly is very well networked into various parts of society, given his job and so on as an analyst, just speaking from a business point of view, I do think that the idea that the ANC would not get an outright majority was expected. How much that was going to be, I think, was a question, and to a large extent, I think, it shocked many, when it did turn out. And I'm speaking here purely in business. As to whether there were some people in business who campaigned for it or not, I really cannot say. But as a representative of an organization that represents a business, there was no campaigning on and even discussion of the election outcomes by business and how things would turn out. But of course, once the results were there, and it was clear that the ANC had fallen fairly far below 50 and would need either one big party to work with or a number of others in order to get over 50%. And then I think people started saying, well, what would be a better outcome under the circumstances? And this is where the kind of talk of what would be a preferable outcomes from the market perspective. And this shouldn't be a surprise or a mystery, because these sentiments were based on what political parties are either known to stand for or had leading up to the elections put forward as their manifesto. And so on that basis, business wants continuity, wants a sense of stability. And from that point of view, business kind of knows what the ANC stands for and so on, having been in government for the past 30 years, and the DA and their policies are also fairly well known, whereas the other political parties, certainly the newer political parties, were less well known. So I think the idea that markets are dictating is not necessarily true, but it is from assessing what political parties profess to stand for, and on that basis, kind of forming a view of what would be a better outcome. And let me also just deal with this idea that markets are dictating. Here you're talking about people who are either investors in South Africa or who are investors in people who are holding bonds, etc., who have to watch what happens to determine whether, in fact, their investment in South Africa would be safe under what conditions. And so from that point of view, it's absolutely and perfectly rational to say, well, under these conditions, this is what I would prefer. And under different conditions, I would probably not do business. So that I think is what is referred to as market preference.
A quick follow-up there, right, Khulekani? Would it be accurate then to surmise and say that the markets are more comfortable with an ANC-DA-IFP coalition in the main as compared to an ANC-EFF-MK coalition?
Absolutely, and this is purely on the basis that the parties that you started with, ANC, IFP, DA, might differ on emphasis, but fundamentally they all accept all of the Constitution as it is. Whereas the other parties such as the EFF, are known to be uncomfortable and even prepared to change some parts of the Constitution. The MK party, on the other hand, just wanting to disband the Constitution altogether. And I think there is a difference. I think to lump the two together would also be unfair to the EFF. To the extent that the EFF is prepared to, through the legal and parliamentary processes, challenge those aspects of the Constitution that they don't agree with, I think that's great. That is what democracy is about. I think it's when you start to go into just the disbandment of the Constitution and everything else that has been said leading up to the elections that would raise concerns and kind of create what is now sort of a binary of those parties that seem to be favored by the markets and those that are not. And it's purely on the basis of the stability that we think is necessary and is provided by the Constitution. And once you want to kind of do away with that, you literally open a can of worms.
So, Ghaleb, what's your assessment, right, having been in politics for some time, in terms of being an MP, of how the major parties conducted themselves during these negotiations? There has been criticism that the MK party came from a zero base and got 15%. They did very well at the polls, but they were not strategic enough in terms of how they approached negotiations. They put the Cyril Ramaphosa step down issue as a deal breaker, and that allowed for them to be marginalized to the extent that even in KZN, where they got 45%, they're not in power. Others have said the EFF just were too greedy. They were asking for too much. And between the EFF and MK, they made it easier for the ANC to gravitate towards the DA. And then talking about the DA, there is a view that there was a lot of grandstanding, the leaking of letters, the writing of letters, Alan Ziller, giving detailed blow-by-blow account of what transpired to the media, and that in the end, they did not get as much as they could have gotten, and that Ramaphosa and the ANC kind of outfoxed them a little bit by creating more deputy ministers and giving more portfolios to the smaller parties. What's your assessment now in terms of how these parties dealt with the negotiations, Ghaleb?
Look, they dealt with it differently. I think that the EFF and MK misread the room in that when you enter in a negotiation, my experience is that you do not put absolute barriers on the table. You say, I'm here to listen, I'm here to talk, and then we take it forward. When you put absolute barriers on the table and somebody disagrees with that particular stance, well, then you are excluded, which is what happened. And that was a strategic mismove. Not that I am punting that I wanted MK or EFF to be around the table in any particular shape or form. But I think given the vote that they mustered collectively, they had a place and they've squandered it. Now, with regard to the other parties, the two main players are the DA and the ANC. And when you deal with two parties who are essentially on different sides of the ideological coin, you need to understand ab initio what the principles are before you embark on positional negotiation. What we had was the embarkation on positional negotiation before any understanding of principles. Now, what do I mean by principles? What is our stance going to be collectively if we join hands together on issues, thorny issues, like expropriation of land without compensation, around BEE, around various other areas that are contentious and that we have been not at Eden for generations, if you like, in Parliament. Now, how are we going to deal with these in terms of how we're going to go forward? Is there going to be a process that allows the meetings of minds? Because with no meetings of mind, you cannot go forward. It will break apart. So what is the process? What are the principles? And what, in terms of process and principles, is the progression? When you don't address those three Ps, you're looking for trouble. Right now, we have a situation where the DEA has got a position, its leader has is in charge of agriculture. Hallelujah. Issues are taken out of that particular issue. We have another MP from the DA who is in charge of infrastructure. There's no money to build anything in infrastructure. We have an issue, another DA cabinet minister who is in charge of basic education. The minute she was appointed, Sattu said, go to hell. How is this going to be resolved? These are thorny and difficult issues. It may come out in the wash, but it needed to be addressed in the powder that went into the machine before the wash.
So, Sandile, if we look at the power dynamics now within this bloated cabinet, right? There are those who opine that Ramaphosa has got himself a good deal here because he's now got the DA essentially protecting him against other factions within the ANC that may want to make a move. Then there are those who say that, look, the DA has got certain portfolios which are quite critical. Others feel that, like Ghaleb has just mentioned, that they may have those portfolios, but they're not going to be able to, do anything effectively. There's also the aspect of certain ministers, for example, like Sandile Swana, being demoted to a deputy minister within the ministry where he was previously the minister. There's also concerns that Ramaphosa has once again bloated the presidency. He's taken public enterprises into the presidency. Is he consolidating power within the presidency? So what's your assessment, Sandile, now that the cabinet has been announced at a national level of the power dynamics and who's come off a little bit stronger after all of these negotiations have concluded?
Oh, thank you so much. I think that, these politics are so tricky. On the one hand, I think that for the time being, Cyril is probably the number one winner out of everybody here. He's managed to damage the ANC in a big way and still remain as the president. If he was the CEO of a respectable company, he would have been fired on the spot with the disastrous electoral outcome, which was foreseeable and he could not prevent it. He has divided the ANC and just created chaos in the country, but he keeps his job. And then he has used the so-called bloated cabinet as to informing that cabinet. He added 3 more ministers for the ministries from 30, he added 3. That's a 10% increment. And then some have got 2 deputies. Now, why are these people there, all of them? He has managed to create a political bodyguard for himself so that at least since Mandela, he can set a record of finishing a certain term properly. All these people are there to protect him from being impeached. So this cabinet and the parliament, the parties that are involved in this, have got one first duty is to make sure that the impeachment process never gets opened. It must be closed. I'm not worried about, for instance, Siviwe Gwahobe taking the position of a Minister of Basic Education. In fact, I was writing about this education just before we started this show. The issues that need to be addressed, they are as clear as daylight. They are critically important. They need to be attended to. And I'm talking about the issue that impact on the learners. As an example, if the Oppenheimer Trust has published a report that says 80% of the teachers in Standard 4 cannot do the maths in Standard 4 as we speak today. The students in Standard 2 cannot read for meaning. 82% of them cannot read for meaning in any language. So if you give them a text in Afrikaans, they don't understand it. You give it to them in Zulu, they don't understand it. In English, in Xhosa, in Setswana, they don't understand what they read in any language. 82%. So, SATU or no SATU, Gwahobe has got to resolve that thing. Even if it means a coup d'etat, whatever, even if it means a war, she must resolve it. So some of the issues are clear and they don't need any further debate right now because the devastation is enormous. So to me, those are some of the broader issues that are out there.
Yeah. When
you look at the Ministry of Defense, where one of the best soldiers we've ever had in South Africa, General Bantu Bonke Odomisa, is there, surrounded by all kinds of people that may be even inappropriate to the portfolio, including the minister, Angie Motshekga, and the other one from Sanko there. You just don't know what they're trying to do there because the general should be there all by himself running that portfolio properly. And he has the experience, he has the credentials. So there's a whole lot of mixed masala, but I think the biggest win is the CR17 funders who funded Ramaphosa and brought him to us with a new dawn, brought him with a Tumamina, which has been a total disaster. Now they've foisted business, the billionaires of this country, foisted this chap there. They are propping him up and keeping him there. And yet management and leadership theory tells us that there is no human institution that can perform above the capability of its leader. So Ramaphosa is the ceiling to which South Africa can perform. And that ceiling is very low. I mean, it's at our ankles, really. That's where the ceiling is. Thank you.
Khulekani, if we look at energy, right, and if we look at electricity, mining, so the energy part of it has been taken away from Ghaleb Cachalia. Many have described Ramaphosa Ramaphosa as a rising political star within cabinet. He's been credited largely, whether justified or not, for the fact that we don't have load shedding at the moment. From a business perspective, how satisfied are you in as far as electricity, energy and mining is concerned with the appointments of Mantashe and Ramaphosa?
Before I answer your question more directly, I think there is a bigger question to be asked, and this is just about the overall functioning of the government, different departments, etc. And in a sense, we can all say that the performance of government has not been up to scratch, and there's all manner of evidence to show that. And one has to then ask, why is that the case? Is it because of perhaps having too many, one ministry looking after many departments, in other words, having a very expanded portfolios? Is it in the composition of departments, etc.? Depending on how you answer that question, you can then say, oh, well, maybe it made sense to separate energy from minerals because perhaps these were not compatible and required different sets of skills or not. I am not qualified to make that judgment. I do know that businesses in mining have struggled for a whole range of reasons, ranging from the length of time it takes for the approval of applications, whether prospecting or mining, etc. So there have been issues there. And of course, there have been issues as they relate to the transportation of the products to market, etc., etc. So I think on the one hand, there is acceptance that there were challenges in that portfolio. Now, coming to the energy, electricity and energy being brought together, what I can say is that when Minister Ramaphosa was appointed as Minister of Electricity, first of all, he really didn't have a department to deploy to doing the actual work. It was just him, a handful of people around him, relied on the committee, crisis committee in the presidency called NICOM, and then had to work directly with ESCOM and the board, etc., to kind of drive. What he did bring, though, was a lot of personal energy into the portfolio, making sure that the issue is seen as a priority, that it was and continues to be, engaged regularly. These weekly communications that he did also gave South Africans a sense of what's happening and what possibilities are there, etc. And so I think he has to be credited with the aspects that he could do given the limited resources that he had at his disposal. He now has a department that he can work with and deploy to fixing the challenges. And we wish him success. But we think that with the energy that he showed, he clearly will be able to do well in this portfolio.
So, Ghaleb, the issue in Gauteng, right? It's kind of funny in the sense that the negotiations have concluded at a national level, but at provincial level, it still hasn't concluded. The DA seems to be saying, listen, you don't give us what we want, we're going to sit out. We'll warm the opposition benches. We can't be given so few seats. The ANC has to come to terms with the fact that they have lost power. And whilst they are sympathetic that there are factional issues, according to Helen Zille, within the provincial leadership of the ANC. They're simply saying we are a party in our own right and that is not our problem. Others are saying, well, there's a bit of hypocrisy there because MK got 45% in KZN and you politically maneuvered to ensure that they're not in power. So why would you want to claim proportional representation and almost as if it's a given here in Gauteng? How critical, in your opinion, Ghaleb, is this impasse, if you like, in Gauteng, considering that this is the most populated province and the economic hub of the country?
Well, it's very interesting. You see, the issues of hypocrisy in terms of how things unfolded in KZN apart. We have a situation in Gauteng where Gauteng is a province, and on the ballot we have a national ballot and we have a provincial ballot. I make no secret of the fact that I did not vote for the DA nationally. I voted for the DA provincially. The province, the DA's provincial team, should be negotiating independently without the helicopter Helen overseeing the whole picture. Otherwise, why have two ballots? Why have a national ballot and a provincial ballot if national is going to call the shots? It makes a nonsense of the whole thing. Solly is a capable man. Solly has a capable team. Go negotiate, Solly. See what happens. See if you can pull off a KZN. See if you can pull off what you can. That's politics. Go and do it. But do not make this link between the centralist power when you are a federalist institution with provincial where you have control over it. It makes no sense to me.
That's it for this week. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.